welcome you to a Lessons Learned chat about the virtual switch. As Brandy mentioned, I'm Lakia Scott out, and I'll serve as the moderator for today's discussion. If you are not familiar, just a little bit about Freedom Schools. The CDF Freedom Schools program is a 6-week summer literacy and cultural enrichment program that's designed to serve children and youth in grades K through 12 in communities where quality academic enrichment program is limited or expensive or non-existent. Each site is sponsored by schools, faith and community-based organizations, municipalities, colleges and universities, or juvenile detention facilities, at no cost to participants or their families. As you may be aware, the CDF Freedom Schools program enhances children's motivation to read and makes them feel good about learning. At the same time, the program connects communities to the right resources in their communities. Last year, 2019, Freedom Schools served over 12,000 students across 181 sites in 28 different states. Today, we will focus more centrally on Texas sites and how, due to the global pandemic, sites were able to make adjustments and adapt to the changing needs of students and their families. In today's session, we've polled questions from registration and generated a few topics for panel members to discuss. After those questions, we'll take questions from audience members, and at the conclusion of our session, resources will be shared via email. So let's meet our panel. Simone, would you like to start us off?
Sure. Good afternoon, everyone. I am Simone Monique Barnes, and I have the joy and honor of serving as the Director of Parent Engagement for Freedom Schools Austin. And this is a new role that we've created here in Austin, and I serve year-round so that we can connect our scholars from summer to summer. We also have we had a really amazing executive director who retired at the end of the summer. We wanted to make sure that he saw our Freedom School scholars through this pivotal and challenging and amazing summer that we've had. We serve at Welcome Table Inc. We have two major programs. One program is our Neighbor to Neighbor program, which provides resources for the community. So things like food pantry, a diaper bank for children and for adults. And we saw a lot of changes over the summer, going from, we used to serve about, for our Neighbor to Neighbor program, we used to serve about 40 individuals over the summer, each month. And then we switched to about 800. And so that's a major difference. And with our Freedom Schools Austin, I think we can move to the next table. We served 40 scholars this summer, and we're really proud of the fact that we had a 95% retention rate of our scholars that started our program and completed our program. Our program served kindergarten through 5th grade, and we had two classes in each grade, two classes in each grade level. So our K through 2 and then our upper elementary school scholars. All right, I'm going to turn it over to our next panelist.
Well, GOOTMORNING, good morning. So I am Brandy Brown. I'm the Executive Director of Hype Freedom School. Really thrilled to have you all join us today as we talk a little bit about our lessons learned. This summer, this is our 21st summer of offering out-of-school time enrichment for K through 12th graders. As you all know, this has been a very interesting summer, but we are excited that we were able to meet the needs of our families during this very interesting time. Traditionally, Hype Freedom School started in 1999, and we typically offer a 6 weeks summer program, Monday through Friday. And we started off in 1999 serving about 30 scholars, and in 2019, we ended our summer serving 300 youth during our summer program. So we had an opportunity to really just take that time out to work with our families. As Lakia talked a little bit about Freedom Schools, what makes us all unique is that we do offer high quality programming and focusing on literacy and connecting our families. Kind of the history behind Hype Freedom School, we started with families for families by family. So my family initially helped us start our program and really get our Hype Freedom School off the ground. And it was our families that we recruited. So we recruited college students within a family and the elementary and middle school students within the family. And so we really have taken the time out to work with our families, not just during the summer, all year long. And so part of that working with our families is that we do offer mental health services to our families all year. And so during the middle of this pandemic, you can imagine that we've been extremely busy in making sure that our families not only have what they physically need, but also ensuring that mentally and emotionally we're able to support them throughout the school year. So I'm excited to be here. I look forward to sharing with you more this afternoon. So I'll turn it to our next panelist.
Hi, my name is Loretta Burns. I'm the Executive Director of AB Christian Learning Center and our Freedom School program here in Fort Worth. AB Christian Learning Center has operated Freedom Schools since 2012, and we've graduated from one Freedom School site to this past summer we had 5 Freedom School sites. We operate both K through 12th grade Freedom School site, with primarily being K through 5th grade. This summer was, as with everyone else, it was very challenging, but there was a lot of lessons learned, and it was very exciting as well because our scholars was ready to go back to school, and our parents was just as ready for them to go back. So it was a very exciting time, a challenging time, but we accomplished what we set out to do. AB Christian Learning Center looks forward to continuing summer programming in the future. Regardless of the situation that we're in, we're continuing now with not after school, but during school learning program during the pandemic to complement the online learning that's taking place in the schools. So we've extended programming to our families, and they've been very appreciative of our programs. And I'm looking forward to talking about what we're doing and the changes that we've made also. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Sue Johnson, and I'm the Executive Director of the NIA Cultural Center. And we've operated our Freedom School since 2007. I think it's been about 14 years we've operated Freedom School. We started with 50 scholars in a very crowded community center for the first 2 years. And we then partnered with the local school district and who provided space for us for the next 12 years so that we were able to expand to reach up to 110 students per year. We were a perfect fit for Freedom School because our organization was, because before I met Miss Brandy, who became my mentor over the next few years, we were providing services to families, including our Family Strengthening and Empowerment Program and our Families and Schools Together program. And it had many of the same components as Freedom School and a lot of the same focus. We have been very happy to have gained many partners, community partners throughout those years. And the community is extremely excited about Freedom School. One of the major changes that the COVID-19 did to our Freedom School, though, was to reduce the number of participants that we could engage in our program. Because our school buildings did close, we were, like everybody else, kind of forced to, if we were going to continue, to find a way to do it virtually. So we reduced the number of students, scholars that we enrolled from 110 to 50 to be sure that we, to just try out and kind of pilot this virtual environment. We also changed our enrollment from kindergarten through 12th grade, 3rd grade through 12th grade. And we also started with scholars who were familiar with the Freedom School, been engaged in Freedom School before. So I look forward to talking to you more about the other changes that we've made.
Thank you so much. What a warm introduction from all of the panelists. And I would also agree that Brandy Brown has been the connector in all of this. So we appreciate all your work, Brandy. So just segueing into our questions, CDF Freedom Schools has been highlighted in both research and practice for being an educational enrichment program that fosters innovation, creativity, and community partnerships amongst various sites nationwide. In terms of thinking about the shift in programming due to the demands of reducing the spread of COVID-19, how did your site innovate? How were you creative? Or how did you establish new partnerships? Ms. Simone, could you take that question first?
I'm sorry, I forgot to unmute myself. Sure. So one of the ways that Freedom Schools Austin decided to innovate, we had several weeks of really long, hard, tough discussions and decisions to make. And we decided at the beginning of the pandemic that we realized that rather than trying to yield to the temptation that just because it's virtual that you can offer to a wider range of people and a larger number of scholars, we decided that it was more important for us to hone in and have a smaller group of scholars that we knew that we could give a lot more resources to. And so we wanted to make sure that our scholars were equipped with every single thing that they needed to succeed. And so that was making resources available and telling them about community resources like COVID testing in the neighborhood, food delivery services and things like that. But more importantly, for our academic portion, we used our funds, we fundraised and we used our funds to equip every single scholar that was in our Freedom School program with a tablet. We also polled all of our families to ask them if they had internet access and provided hotspots with internet access for those who didn't. We ordered books so that they didn't have to share. Normally in a classroom setting, one teacher holds a book and reads, and then you can share those books. And so we wanted to make sure that all of our scholars were equipped. And so that was, I think, one of the most important ways that we pivoted was making sure, realizing that we needed to deepen the support that we gave to our scholars this summer.
Ms. Sue, what'd you do?
Well, what we did was a little bit of overkill at first. I knew I didn't know a lot about virtual engagement of students and how to keep them excited. So I reached out to an instructional designer who was also really good with IT, who designed for us a content management system that had the curriculum on it and incorporated a lot of the online tools and techniques. What we found later, though, was that was probably overkill. That with a good Zoom and the kids with a good orientation, the staff with a good orientation of those tools and techniques, that we probably could have saved that expense. But it did add value and helped us to get on sooner than we would have been able to without it. We also adapted all our activities online, parent meetings, finale, field trips, everything was online. We also assigned our SLIs, our servant leader interns, and the leadership team to be content experts on the select online tools and programs. And we required them to demonstrate how they could be used by using them in modeling the curriculum. We maintained our relationships with our community partners and communicated all the resources that we could muster to the parents beginning at the time of enrollment. If we had them on our list and we knew about something that was happening that could be empowering or resourceful to them, like Simone mentioned, food banks testing opportunities, all of that. We shared that in real time via text messages. And one of the last things that we did was we verified that our vendors or volunteers for afternoon enrichment activities were prepared and able to engage virtually. We realized that just because they were content experts did not mean that they would be able to keep excitement and engagement during the afternoon activities with all age groups. So we did a variety of things.
Sounds like you guys were very innovative. What about you, Ms. Brandy?
All right, so I think the first thing was the biggest thing for us as we adjusted was just diving in. I mean, we've been doing the same type of programs for the last 20 years. So just to think to now to go from going from what we know to going to what we absolutely did not know. And so I think the first thing was we had already hired all of our staff. And so we had sent out letters saying that you had a position and if something would change because of the current pandemic, that we would, have to retract our offer. So the first thing I think that was extremely challenging was that we had these college students that was looking forward to having some type of sense of normalcy for the summer and was looking forward to having a summer job. And I think the hardest part for me was taking the time out to really wrap my mind around to say, hey, we offered you that job, but like everybody else, we have to say we cannot offer it to you. And so what we first did, we went through our list of candidates to identify which candidates we thought would be the strongest. And the way that we did that, we identified those who we knew had already had some type of training with our model and knew who we were. And so we took that time out to kind of talk to them a little bit about, you already know the model, it won't be the same, but can you take what you already know and shift it to this virtual world? And so we had all of our candidates to take the time out to do a commercial. And so they did a commercial and they sent it to us and they recorded it and sent it, and we were able to pick which candidates we thought would be the strong ones. And I think we did an amazing job in finding some candidates that are some college students who really was able to help us as the leadership team really realize that this could work. So we relied on them heavily to be able to help us create the model. So I think that was the other shift that we made, was that traditionally we would kind of take our year-round staff, we would allow them to create what pieces of the model we wanted to do for the summer. And how we backed it up a little bit this summer was said, we had the individuals who were actually going to facilitate the model. We had them to design what Hype at Home would actually be. And not only did they design it, but then they were in charge of implementing it. And so there was some ownership there. There were some pros and cons that were there because they had the ownership of the model. It was interesting for us to be able to come back and say, okay, well, y'all thought about this, but there's a shift that has to be made here. And so I think the other piece that was really big for us was the flexibility and ensuring that we remained flexible, not just during the time that we were planning, but actually the time that we implemented too.
Thank you. Wow. So I'm sure you weren't the only one who kind of had to make adjustments to staffing and how you trained your leaders. Ms. Loretta, what did you guys do to innovate?
Oh, we did a lot of different things that we were not used to doing, but we managed to make it through. First, we wanted to concentrate on our staff and our SLIs because we know as traumatic as this was for the scholars, it was for the staff as well. So we engaged in some training. We did some adverse childhood experience training for our SLIs at the very beginning. Cook's Children's Hospital became a very good partner with us. They conducted that training for our staff. They also came back midway through Freedom School just to check in, and which was phenomenal because, at midway, everybody's like, So they came back midway during the training, during Freedom School to check in and see how everybody was feeling and share some experience. We were not Zoom. We did a hybrid model. So we started out in-person training. And that was a huge advantage because we were able to get the scholars hype. They loved Freedom School. They were just out of the house from being locked up for a whole semester. So they were very excited about Freedom School. And then we went virtual for a week and a half. So by having them hooked already, they were more eager to log on and go virtual. They knew their teachers, they knew their the other class scholars, so they were more apt to log in and be engaged. We also found a need and we developed Zoom etiquette, because when we first went on Zoom, we saw some things like, okay, so we developed Zoom etiquette real quick. And by the time what you saw at the beginning, we were very, very pleased at what you saw from the scholars at the end. We also had to develop that Zoom etiquette for parents also, to let them know you can't just walk in and start talking to your scholars and asking the teacher questions. There's a time set aside. So this was new to us. We had not anticipated that, but it was very good because it was very much needed. Even in establishing a dress code, you can't come to class in your pajamas, you can't lay across the bed and all of those things. So once we developed, and once they knew what the etiquette was, then they followed. They had no problems following. So that helped out tremendously by the end. The other thing we had to do, we had to have an active parent engagement component, and we had to let our parents know this is not an option, because we were in person, because after we went Zoom for a week and a half, then we came back in person. So we had to have I'm sorry, I'm muting myself. They were very cooperative. They were engaged in the Zoom meetings. We did the parent engagement totally by Zoom. The other adjustment we did, we went to Monday through Thursday, because we felt that, especially in person, our staff would be really stressed and they needed that downtime. But we used that Friday for training. Every Friday we had training all morning. We had financial literacy training. We had the cooks, staff come back and do some training, sort of soft counseling. So that was very helpful. The SLIs loved it. The staff, they loved the training, especially the financial literacy, which was sponsored by Chase. So we did all of those things. Was an adjustment in meeting the need, but getting the job done just as well.
Thank you. I can imagine that Zoom etiquette would have been paramount when we think about our students transitioning back into the traditional school spaces and how they need to learn the tricks of the trade with Zoom. So thank you all for that.
I just want to point out one other thing that I think that was really vital that we didn't talk about, is that while all of us work for, and run individual programs, we leaned on each other, because I think that was one of the really vital things, is that, like, we all know each other. We meet every week, and really realizing that we needed to lean on each other. And I think that's one of the things that I think all of us are learning from this pandemic, is that you cannot go at this alone. So really reaching out and finding your own cohort is really important.
Absolutely. Teamwork makes the dream work. It takes a village, right? Freedom School Tribe, right? So our next question, this one's directed towards Ms. Simone and Ms. Loretta. Freedom Schools research notes how the program builds on educational enrichment, similar to school settings, but it also builds on relationship building and cultural identity formation, like at home. In this, we know that Freedom Schools proves to be successful in merging the two worlds of home and school. However, I want to know from you all, what can traditional public schools learn from the model in order to improve social, cultural, and academic outcomes for students?
I can start to answer that. Freedom School is such an amazing resource and such an amazing program, because it really does build on who we are and what we do. I think one of the things that was really important is really being intentional about who you hire and who you for your staff, and who you recruit as your volunteers. It really should reflect the student body. One of the things that we really wanted to make sure is that our scholars and our parents, when they met who's teaching their children, right? Especially, I mean, all the time, but particularly during this pandemic when we're all so emotional and stressed out and things, and you just want things to go right, right? And you want to know that when you are walking away from your child who is online, you want to trust that the experience is positive and amazing. So really, really, can't stress enough the importance of who you hire and who you recruit as your volunteers. Even down to at Freedom School Austin, one of the things that we did was we also hired help desk staff, so that to help set up the tablets, but also to answer questions for parents. And it was just an amazing experience to know that when our families called into the help desk, that they responded with, with such love and compassion. It was like a family environment. So I think that's really important. I think Harambe, so we start every single day, and in Freedom School Austin, we also end it every day. A lot of us do both. We started every day with Harambe, which is a series of cheers and chants, a series of music, and series of ways that we interact. And so music and movement are very important. I was just listening to a podcast this morning when I went for my walk. And one of the things that somebody on the podcast was sharing about how the importance of music is, right? In our home, in a lot of our households, like we clean the house to music, right? Saturday morning for a lot of families, even as an adult, you're like, gospel music or whatever, Motown, whatever that thing is that your family listens to on Saturday morning, right? It's a part of the culture. And so really valuing that and even doing dance breaks, right? And realizing that we need those kind of moments. And even in our finale that came up, like we had some moments where our kids did some really amazing, powerful speeches and presentations, but then they also had some moments where they were just being completely silly, like doing their thing, whatever the latest dance is. And I think that's important. They're not separate, right? Because you don't separate yourself. You have all these different components that make yourself. I think one of the other things that I really appreciate about Freedom Schools, the Freedom Schools way, is the positive behavior management. And so as a parent engagement specialist, the director of parent engagement, I had the joy of having to call parents sometimes. And I remember the first couple of calls, parents kind of were like, you could hear them holding their breath and exhaling where, they were like, wait, that's all you were calling for? Because you wanted to make sure I got whatever information or, wanted to check on technology or something positive, or like, oh my goodness, your kid did the most amazing thing. Let me tell you about it. They were so prepared for a call from their child's school, their child's learning environment, to be a behavioral checklist of all the things that their scholar had done wrong. And so really valuing positive behavior is a thing. We use Class Dojo, and we only use the positive behavior thing. So the kids earn points in this kind of attendance tracking and parent communication tool app. And so we would talk about the positive things that they did. So I think that's really important. And also valuing, another point that I think is really important is valuing their voice. So I really love that the Freedom Schools way is that we do not raise our hands in Freedom School. And so even translated to on Zoom, the first thing we talked about in our Zoom etiquette was that, hey, we don't raise our hands in Freedom School. So you're gonna mute your mic. And then when you have something that you want to share or say, then you unmute you wait until nobody else is speaking, then unmute yourself and then mute yourself back. And so it was just this beautiful way of having this mutual respect and really valuing, giving them the agency to share their thoughts and their questions without having to wait on somebody else to give them permission for those thoughts and those things. And I also think that also valuing voice also relates to parents. And so in our parent meetings, we even call them parent gatherings, right? So there was a very social aspect. We started with some music. We might have had a dance break. We had conversation, but also about half of our meeting was very intentional to have our parents talk and share and share their thoughts, their needs, and more importantly, their expertise, right? So many times we'd like to think of our parents, we'd like to think ourselves as educators as like, we're the experts, right? But really our parents are the experts. And so really realizing that we are all one, right? And so parents play a role, our scholars play a role, our SLIs play a role, our staff plays a role, and our volunteers. We are one family, and we each bring something to the table. And I think that's one of the really valuable things that the Freedom Schools Way comes in place. So I'd love to hear what Miss Loretta, what's your thoughts?
Thank you. One of the things, several things from the Freedom School Way that we incorporated, which was extremely valuable this summer. We established priorities, and we let our staff know the priority was first safety and health of our scholars. That was the #1 priority. And the self-esteem part, which I think a lot of times the schools sometimes miss how important that is. Our role is to improve those scholars' self-esteem and make them feel good about themselves. And oddly enough, academics was #3, because we feel like you keep them safe, you keep them healthy, you improve the self-esteem, the academics will take care of itself. We set very high expectations, and I like that about the Freedom School model. She set the high expectations. I remember a quote from Wes Moore when he was asked, was he a product of his environment? And he said, no, I'm a product of my expectations. So we take that to heart, that if you set the bar high, the scholars will reach the bar. They will raise up. And when they reach it, you move it a little bit higher. So I really like that about Freedom School. And I think that the schools miss that a lot, in that they're so focused on academics. They'll do whatever it takes to get the academics done, but they're missing the key component to getting the academics done. And that is expectation and setting the self-esteem, those scholars feeling good about themselves. And the Freedom School is cooperated all throughout. Good job, with a lot of positive reinforcement. We make sure we tell our scholars never what's wrong with you, but what happened to you. You're smarter than that behavior. It's never negative. It's reinforcing and making them feel good. You tell them enough that they're leaders, and leaders don't do that, eventually they're going to stop doing it because they know they're a leader. So these are things that Freedom School really brings to heart and helps us with our scholars, that I think gets lost in traditional school because they're so focused on the academics.
Great insights. Thank you both for sharing that. Very powerful nuggets. So my next question is for Ms. Sue and Ms. Brandy. What is the greatest lesson learned based on your site's level of adaptability and persistence during this pandemic? And, what future considerations are you making note of in consideration of how you're planning for the next summer? Ms. Sue, you're on mute.
I'm so sorry. Okay, I'm sorry. One of the biggest things that I learned is that we just really have to be nimble and flexible, because we're not sure, as I go into planning for next year and budgeting and all of that, you got to figure we may be in the same situation, or very nearly the same situation. So planning for virtual and non-virtual environments. In-person environments is one of the first things I learned I have to do at this point, is to be flexible. The other thing that I realize is that, really just still need to be guided by the data and the feedback that we get from the parents and the scholars and the community partners as well. I've learned that community partners are extremely important in this work, and it's even in this environment, because we were able to expand the services that not expand, but we realized that we needed to give more support to parents about resources and opportunities. So having those partnerships and having those relationships with the community partners For instance, the foundations, the local foundations got together and provided what they called emergency resource grants and supports that we were able to give out to parents right away. Not only were our parents dealing with the pandemic and trying to work from home with their kids and all of the stress that all of that provided, we partnered with a group called Coalition of Urban Resource Experts, which were a group of psychologists, psychiatrists, social workers, counselors, to help our parents understand not only the ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences, but also how to, their well-being during this period and strategies that they could use to maintain their well-being and try to keep some normalcy in their families. So, we realized, as probably happened in your communities as well, that the child abuse and neglect was ticked up, as well as domestic violence. So we understanding that all of that was going on in the midst of us trying to implement our Freedom School, we tried to bring some real supports for those kinds of things as well. So going forward, some of the things that I know that we need to do is in terms of recruiting and hiring staff, that they are capable of delivering the curriculum and engaging in Freedom School both ways, and identifying what those characteristics are and being able to find those kinds of individuals who are up and ready for it, regardless of the situation. We also learned that through our partners, we were able to do stuff like supply distribution. We'd hooked up with the food banks to try to help to get out information about Freedom School, as well as using that opportunity to deliver supplies in a safe way. We did some of that, not as much as we thought we would, but that's some of the main lessons that I learned.
Thank you for that. Ms. Brandy, what about you guys?
Yeah,
Lessons
so I think one of the things that we started with, let me tell you, I researched and researched like I went to bed with my phone like right here trying to figure out exactly what were we going to do for the summer. And I think the first thing that we really took the time out to do to figure out how can we simplify, like what were the three things, like Loretta said, their main priorities were establishing kind of the safety first. And so we started thinking through like what are the main priorities, and we landed with we really wanted to make sure that we created and we kept the culture of a Hype Freedom School. How do we keep that culture even in the midst of all of the changes that we had to make? How do we connect with our families, and then of course how do we communicate with them? And so we knew that we are used to having 7 different locations where our young people and our families were required to come in and sign in their scholars before they drop them off, right? And so it's not this, you come, you let your children walk in and they go away. But part of our culture was the parents came in and signed out, not just for the safety purposes, but also for us to be able to get to know them a little bit better, for us to be able to establish a rapport and a relationship with them. But during the pandemic, we were like, we won't be meeting face to face. And so how do we continue to keep that culture? And so we recognized one was that, as you mentioned, Lakia, earlier, the Freedom Schools is rooted in the civil rights movement. And so during that time when education was not fair and equal for everyone, there were a group of leaders who did everything possible that they could do to ensure that our families and our children had the quality education that they needed. So by any means necessary. And so we took the time out to recognize, one, no, we were not going to be able to provide our services to all 300 youth just because we didn't know how. We didn't know how. We didn't have enough time to figure out how. But we knew that we would be able to provide provide something. And so by any means necessary, we were willing to provide something. And so I think the other piece that we talk a lot about with it being virtual, what we don't talk about with this virtual switch is the communication within our families doesn't always have to be on the computer. And so we took the time out this summer to pick up the phone and just say, hey, checking in. Does your scholar need anything? Do you need anything? Text messages for us have been huge. So just sending a text message to say, hey, and our poor families, they have been so nice. Like, I'm just waiting for somebody to send us a message like, Ms. Brady, don't send me a message at 9:30 at night. But that's what I thought about it. But Remind, we use Remind, and Remind has been a great asset for our organization and a great lifeline for our families to be able to just shoot us a text message to say, hey, this is what we need. And so overly communicating was what we really have strived to do this during this time. And during that communication, we recognize what some of our needs were of our families. So moving forward, our goal is to keep up with that. Like, I think we did okay with communicating with our families, but we are aware that we could do even better. It doesn't always have to be the traditional form of communication. The other piece that I would say that we did that was unique, and we did not think about it originally. We thought we offered the supplies to our families. We delivered books to our families this summer. And we thought we'll just have them to all come and meet up, and we will distribute them. And one of our team members who is also managing the chat right now, and our team member that's also helping with the spotlights and behind the scene, both Ms. Taylor and Ms. G, so Taylor Bass and Pauline Kirkland and then Drusilla Bowden, we decided to come together and say, hey, what if we delivered our books and our supplies to our families? And so it gave us a chance to see them, one, in their own space, and we had our mask on, and it literally was Porsche deliveries, like ring the doorbell, like, hey, we felt like we were a part of Amazon's delivery team. But it was cool. It was cool for the scholars to be able to see us outside of the screen, but it also gave us a chance to relate to our families and see where they live, which we hadn't done in the past. And so having that personal touch, I think really made a difference. And I also think the last thing that I would share kind of moving forward was the flexibility. We traditionally offered Monday through Friday, and we decided for our Zoom time, what we call Hype at Home, that we would offer it Monday through Thursday and not actually offer the program on Fridays, just to give our scholars an opportunity to kind of regroup, have a break from technology, but then also our staff, in order for us to kind of figure out what we needed to do for the next week. And then we shorten our day for the online space. So as you going into your after school programs, really look at your schedule and figure out, can a scholar really sit here and talk to you and engage with you for 2 hours? Maybe not, but could you do 30 minutes of them up and they're singing and they're chanting and they're doing their dance or they're TikTok and whatever they're doing for 15 minutes, and then you read or do some type of reading activity where they are doing more than being within their box? Could you do that for another 10 minutes, where then you look up and an hour has gone by much quicker than we thought it would go? And so I think really the flexibility to be able to switch, and I would say that really have made it successful this summer, and something that we would do moving forward for the summers to come.
Thank you so much. Incredibly insightful and very wise. Thank you. Thank you. So now we're going to take the rest of the time to answer questions from the audience. I believe Ms. Pauline and Ms. Taylor have some questions that our panelists can answer.
Miss Clarissa had a question to Miss Sue. She wanted to know about your online curriculum and if all the books were online.
Yes, all of the books were online, and it had associated online tools that might be used. the challenge was that it was predetermined by the instructional designer what tools were there. But in the end, as we moved along, with the staff knowing more about those tools, they were able to switch those out. So yes, all of the books were online.
And I can also answer that. So we used a combination. So for our integrated reading curriculum time, our class time where the scholars were in their individual smaller classes with 10 scholars each, those we made sure that each scholar had their own book. And both the SLIs who were teaching and the scholars had their books so they could, and that's really where you're going deeper, and they're, some of the books may not be necessarily read aloud, or like for our older scholars, it might've been a chapter book. And so we got individual books. However, for Harambe every morning, part of the Freedom Schools is that you start every morning with a read aloud guest. And so we have different guests would come on Zoom every morning and read a book. You can see some of the picture books behind me, actually. And so with that, we realized that it would be really great if the scholars could also see the pages up close. And so we scanned in copies of the books in our closed classroom. So this was not available to the public. And we showed the pages and while the read aloud guests sat there with the actual picture book reading. And so they got the combination of being able to really look at, because, with picture books, it's really important that the illustrations are as much a vital part of the story as the words. And so we wanted our scholars to be able to read the words and see the book at the same time. So we did a combination.
Can I clarify? I wanted to make sure on the content management system, the curriculum was online, right? But the books were delivered to the students. Each child got their own set of books as well.
Miss Clarissa Webb also has a follow-up question for you, Miss Sue. She wants to know if your scholars will also have access to those books moving forward, and if they're able to build their libraries with those books. I see the response there.
Absolutely. They did get their own copies of the books, all of the books. Yes.
Awesome. Go ahead.
Also, Ms. Tony asks, how have your funders responded to your abilities to pivot?
My funders were very understanding. They were very supportive and even helped direct me to other opportunities for funding during this period. So they were very understanding of the challenge, and I had no problem making adjustments to my both budget and to the program.
So I agree. I think our funders really helped us with the shift. It was kind of, and just so you all know, this group of folks that we're talking to today, even though we have been partnered, all doing the same model for the last 8 to 20 something years, we had not worked this closely together in the past. And so kind of the shift of our funders saying, hey, what is your alternative budget, since you submitted this budget to be in person and now you're shifting it to be online? What are you going to do? And so when we met on a weekly basis, we kind of came together and started having some of that conversation about, okay, so how did you tell your funder you're going to shift this way or shift that way, and what was the response? And so I think not only the funders were receptive, but I think it also was helpful to have a network of people to lean on to talk through what were some of those alternative ways we were going to need our funding for the summer.
Welcome Table Inc. We actually won some really competitive funding grants specifically for our response to COVID. And it is one of the reasons that we were able to provide all of our scholars with tablets and the technology, and then additional books and things that they needed. So I think I'm also in agreement that funders are really understanding that we are all in this together, and that things, you know, the evaluations and assessments and just the deliverables are looking very different. And I think the fact that we've all maintained some type of engagement and have really positive responses from our families is really what the funders are happy and thrilled to hear.
I reached out to one of my funders, one of the funders, to try to maintain support for our Freedom School scholars throughout the year with this virtual schooling. And so we're going to be able to use the platform we developed for Freedom School and extend its function to tutoring and after-school help for students. So we were able to get some funding for tutoring for Freedom School students to help to close that gap that they've lost, not only potentially during the summer, but since the COVID-19 shutdown of the schools.
And this is Loretta in response to the question accommodating struggling readers. I think this was unintended good consequences for struggling readers, because we had to reduce the number of students we were serving to make sure we could social distance and accommodate the environment. So our struggling readers actually got more attention, and with the class size reduced, the teacher were able to accommodate those struggling readers a lot better.
Yes, we also had similar, while we were completely virtual, we had 2 SLIs in every classroom. We also had staff, like our site coordinator, who was able to float, and some of our staff are reading specialists. So we had more adults who can give them more time. We also, because of the class schedule being online, and we knew that it was really important to give our SLIs and our scholars a lot of breaks during the day. So what we did was we also had office hours for our SLI. So instead of keeping them busy every moment throughout the day, which, you know, typically in a summer program we had breaks. And so they had office hours. And so if our scholars needed some one-on-one attention or questions, they were able to log in during those office hours and have that undivided attention for the SLIs and or with their parents. So it was great.
And regarding these practices post-COVID, I think for us not, particular because the younger scholars require the social and emotional contact. They require the in-person, and that's just very critical, I think. So I don't think that we would consider a lot of the COVID practice unless we absolutely had to.
So Ms. Loretta was answering a question that we kind of passed around as panelists, but it asked, do you think you will adopt some of these virtual practice post-COVID? And then the other question was with the struggling readers, I think our struggling learners. I think for HYPE, our struggling learners, I'll be honest, you know, we typically serve 300 youth. This summer, we served a little less than 100. So we miss some, and it's very disheartening to know that we miss some, but we've worked really hard to maintain contact with their families. So if they do need support, we knew that there were some in-person programs and some other programs elsewhere. And so we forward all of that information to our families. And I think that was one of the pluses for this summer, was that most of our families only participated with HYPE for the summer, but with so many programs that were often both virtual and in person, we were able to share with our families that here are some additional programs that are out there, and maybe your scholars can participate in those too. So we had some of our families who partnered with some of the other organizations within the city of Houston. And we even had a young lady from California that joined us this summer too. But I think those are the things that we can talk about post-COVID, and ensuring that we are connecting our families to the vast resources throughout their area to be able to connect with other resources.
Yeah, I think for us, one of the ways that we will keep some of the practices, I think the over communication, as Brandy had mentioned earlier, really texting, calling, having our mic checks, our parent check-ins, being available. But also, I think those scholars that, as Brandy was saying, we all of us, it seems, had to go a little bit smaller. And so being able to reach out to a lot of those scholars that maybe didn't participate in our summer program, but certainly can stay connected. And so, for instance, we had one scholar who had some severe dyslexia. And so we found that over the summer, that scholar needed to not participate in our program because suddenly all the resources, the school resources that weren't available when the shutdown happened, their school district suddenly was able to provide a lot of that tutoring and support that they needed. And so they couldn't be online, obviously, all day, every day, right? And so that's an example of a scholar that, because of the pandemic, because of this new use of technology that we're not all embracing, that's a scholar that we can keep in our Freedom School family throughout the year and still check in and still feel like they're a part of it. And their parents can still participate in some of our social activities and our parent gatherings. So I think that's one of the great things that I think we're all taking away, is that we need to stay connected. You know, we can and we need to and will stay connected more and in lots of different ways.
One of the ways that we decided to stay connected too was to also offer like booster sessions during school holidays, Christmas break, Thanksgiving break, Easter break, and give students the opportunity to do a Freedom School day or 2 or 3 days to keep them connected and engaged with Freedom School and looking forward to the next summer.
We have some additional questions that are brewing in the chat. One that we can answer from Cecilia: do you think that going virtual this summer will be a help to the scholars for the school year? Will they be able to keep up?
I know we only have 2 more minutes or 1 more minute. So I'll say I think it was a huge help, especially for our early learners. We had one of the parents to say that she knew that her daughter would be better prepared going into the first grade because she participated.
And this is Loretta. We also, it was tremendous help because we now have some of those same scholars in our online learning program, and they can get on, log in, and get right to work. So it was a tremendous help.
I have to say it was also a tremendous help for some parents as well. Just the little bit we did help the parents to get prepared for what's happening in school a little.
And I'll answer, I saw some of the questions. So we use platforms that we use were ClassDojo. We used a customer relationship management software called Breeze, which really made it easy to text message parents and email and keep track of points of contact. We also use Google Classroom, and we used Zoom. So we really like Zoom because you can see a lot of scholars at the same time. And Google Classroom was helpful. We had classrooms for their individual classes, classrooms for Harambe, and then we had a SLI and staff classroom using Google Classroom. So it was really great, and even some of the feedback from that was one of our kindergartners. Their parent was like, I didn't even have to help the kid get into class. They were able to do it on their tablet on their own, so it was really helpful. And for Freedom School Austin, those who came to our finale, social justice and racial injustices were a big part of their finale. I guess, you know, when you leave the student voice and let the scholars talk about what they want to talk about, they were very much so like, we are going to change this world, and this world has to change now and today. And so, yeah, I think when you make space for their thoughts, and it's going to happen, right?
Absolutely, I agree.
Well, we want to thank you all for attending this lessons learned about the virtual switch. We will also provide follow-up responses to the questions that were not answered in the resources link that you'll be emailed after this session ends. Thank you to all of our panelists. Great job. Awesome work. Thank you for all this summer.
Thank you all for joining. We've